Welcome everyone. And this is Spiritual Technologies 2.0 live. And I think this is our third season. So we're having an extraordinarily interesting and so far fun get together today. And we have Dr. Carole Griggs with us. I hope you see in our upper left, I do. And then you have Ted Strauss. And Doug, you want to read us in who we're talking to here and a little bit of the bio in the background?
Sure, you guys. We have, like John said, Carole Griggs and Ted Strauss. Carole Griggs, PhD, is the co-founder of iConscious. She is a university professor, international speaker, professional coach and consultant, author, writer, and pioneer and leader in areas of consciousness, evolution, and human development, and integrative wellness and nutrition. Carole is a professor at National University for the Masters of Science in Complementary and Integrative Healthcare Program, owner of Carole Griggs Enterprises, LLC, at drcarolegriggs.com, and author of Space to See Reality, a new model for professional coaches. For more than a decade, Carole has been extensively researching and working with clients and coaches worldwide in the awakening and development process. She brings a depth and breadth of experience and expertise working with clients in the evolution of human consciousness, personal and interpersonal development, and in various modalities of physical health and well-being. Carole holds a doctorate degree in professional coaching and human development, a master's degree in education and teaching, and a bachelor's degree in science. Ted Strauss is also the co-founder of iConscious and has been a writer and teacher of awakening for over 40 years. Over the past 19 years, he was instrumental in building the foundations of waking down work, including designing and presenting core Dharma workshops and the mentor and teacher training programs. During that time, he worked very personally with thousands of students to assist their iConscious realization and further awakening process. Through this experience, Ted has discovered ways to streamline personal and interpersonal development, enabling most aspirants to experience major shifts in days or months instead of years or lifetimes.
Awesome. So, anyway, what we're going to be looking at today, and I've been looking at your website and your work and taking your test, and you guys have developed a new, well, I don't know if it's totally new, but you're at least you're standing on the shoulders of giants, but it's a new iteration of a new evolutionary map that kind of shows you where you are and where you're going and helps you get there more quickly. And I know I can hear a lot of people going, well, the map is not the territory. Yeah, we get it. But if you're going to negotiate the territory, you're going to need a good map, and especially I was a wilderness guide for years in rugged, crazy southern Utah wilderness, and maps saved our lives many times. Didn't mean we just looked at them 24 hours and walked off cliffs, but we sure used the map to get to where we're going and save lives and years of struggle. So why don't I just turn it over to you guys, and what would you like to, how would you like to riff off of that?
Oh, I would love to riff off of that. I think that actually I love what you just said about how it really is about finding where you are and how to get where you're going. And it is also about lives. Because to me, I have seen so many people go through so many different iterations of spiritual or personal growth work and eventually end up in so much confusion and various cul-de-sacs that they just kind of give up because they don't know where else to go. And in the giving up, it can be very bad. Lots of, difficult ways of, it's very difficult for people who are deeply prompted to do spiritual seeking if they don't know how to get where they're going. So I've seen lives be lost over that. And so that's why I'm glad you said that.
Carole?
Yeah, what I've seen with a lot of clients over the years is a wandering from one teacher to the next, or one practice to the next, or one book to the next. And that's where Ted and I really got together and thought, let's build a system that helps create a little bit more guidance along the way of patterns that we've seen over the years to help streamline this process, to potentially help eliminate some of the detours along the way. So that was kind of the impetus behind creating a model, is to create a little bit of a framework to provide some guidance.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about it is you have 5 in the basic test. I don't know if there's more advanced tests, but there's 5 basic capacities that you're measuring. So it's not just the spiritual this or that, and
right.
It's really true to have healthy, integral, holistic growth that is kind of instead of like It's all there together. You're measuring the essential things that have to be accounted for. And I really appreciated that.
Yeah, right. So in my studies and in the work that Ted and I have done, a lot of the research that we've looked at is around all the different models that are currently out there. So there's some models that are just on consciousness or ego development, some that are just on your uniqueness and personality types, some that are just on emotional intelligence, some that are on body awareness, and some that are on cognitive and capacities and whatnot. And so we wanted to put together a model that incorporated all of those, and it wasn't an or, it was an and, because we've noticed that when people's development is too far in one of those domains and a little bit further behind in another one, it really slows the process.
Yep. And you know, I'm developmentalist. I love this stuff, and I've studied a lot of different models, and I use them, and I think in those terms. And I think one of the useful things about, I mean, the people that would be attracted to it would probably already be initiating or interested in getting on the spiritual path, because that's front and center. But it does help to know that you're not the top of the food chain, perhaps, you know, that there is work to do. You know, there was a Jewish mystic, I forget his name, but he said, it's good to know what's above you. You know, oh, wow. Yeah, I better get down to it and stay on the path and do the practice and do what I need to do to get where I need to be, because I'm becoming more convinced. And we have these wonderful little devices now that can, you know, all the disastrous news going around the world is, you know, 24/7 streamed in. And so it can get very overwhelming and crushing. But I think why this work is so important, because the only way that I can see out, the only way we can get through this time is through evolution. And with increased pressure of all of us, you know, hanging out and having all this technology and all this population and all these stressors, that is the mother of evolution. And hopefully enough of us will get there in order to bring us all, which is right, the one, all up to that level where we can evolve and grow in a beautiful, creative, and really, you know, inspiring way.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. And we're trying to do that in a way that is deeply integrative in ways that maybe haven't been implemented very well before. For instance, you said, you know, spirituality is front and center, but for us, it's like whole being development is what's front and center. Right? And spirituality is just that consciousness domain. And then you got uniqueness, which is making sure we attend to being who we are uniquely. And that's a place that a lot of spiritual schools have missed out on, or created a lot of misunderstandings around, let's just say. You know, people have tended to go and think they're supposed to act like the guru or whatever and be like that. And, you know, obviously that doesn't work for very long. We want to encourage people to be absolutely who they are and show that becoming who you uniquely are is part of whole being development, not just spiritual, not just uniqueness, also emotions, deeply important. There's another one that's been so overlooked, misunderstood, distorted in ways that have been really hurt people. And it's really painful for us to see that. And then we got mind and body. People have spent a lot of time for thousands of years on practices for mind and practices for body and practices for consciousness. We're just intent on showing what integration means among all of those, because to us, that is the key to the fastest possible way of personal and collective development.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
You know, the other thing when it comes to technology, you know, our model is going to be used in multiple frames for which we'll get into a little bit later. But you know, the level of consciousness that is developing these technological tools is the level that is getting put out and emitted into the world. So it's extremely important that there's an awareness around what is the level of consciousness that is creating these tools, because that is what will spread. So bringing awareness around that seems to be something that is really important.
Right. So if, for instance, I'm sorry, I just want to quickly say, for instance, if you train your artificial intelligence by having it read Facebook posts, you're going to get, you know, the Tay problem, which is a perfect example of what Carole was just alluding to.
I was going to ask if you guys could possibly go into a little more detail about how your model is laid out in terms of, you spoke of levels of development there, and how the levels of development actually unfold in this process?
Yeah. Let's take a quick look at the model so we can see the whole thing here in one shot. So here's the model can't really be all seen. It's very wide and not very tall. So this is what it looks like at this level. And basically the structure that can be seen at this level is dual, unified, and singular. So in other words, we have decided to have three major phases of personal development. And within these, each one of these has a number of different stages, which we call chapters. The dual phase includes all of the chapters of development that happen before the person awakens to fundamental unity. Unity between all of these domains and unity between self and other. When that fundamental unity is realized, we move into the unified phase. And then all these various chapters, which we can look at a little more closely, then all of these chapters come under that. And the third phase is what we call singular. And this refers to the collapse of subject-object perspective, which is not well distinguished in spiritual circles in general between what we mean by the singular phase and what we mean by the unified phase. In fact, also not generally well discriminated is what people mean by consciousness awakening, which to us is just part of the dual phase. Because, and the reason we do that, by the way, and I'll just keep this short, is because awakening to consciousness is just one of the domains of our being. So if you've got a consciousness awakening that isn't integrated with the infinite in the other domains, then you're still in the dual phase. You're just having one of those awakenings that's just very consciousness centric. For some, some have that in the head, some in the heart, some more in the belly. But as long as there isn't a deep integration enough to fall into unity, it's still in the dual phase. And then when we get into unified, there's a lot of discrimination we have here, and this is part of what we're bringing. Part of the extra sort of high resness that we're bringing to the view of the personal development process is breaking down the unified and singular phase into individual chapters that to us are perfectly obvious, having worked with thousands of people over the years. But a lot of people just, it's not that clear. So we wanted to make sure that was clear. And we also wanted to make sure was really clear is that we have to be dealing with all of these 5 domains, because if you're missing any one of these, you're missing something enormous about who you are. And
you're fractured, and it's a mess.
Right.
Exactly.
You're
Absolutely.
like Humpty Dumpty that fell off the wall.
Exactly. Exactly. And yeah, we agree with Ken Wilber that we also have to consider the 4 quadrants, which we have called the 4 views, and we deal with that deeper into the material. We don't want to confuse people at this level of the view of the model. We find that when people can just view this level of the model, it makes it easier for them to just look at it and go, oh, wow. Oh, I think I'm about here. Wow. Okay. Now I can see where I am and where I'm going. And then people start having these epiphanies about it, usually right away, just by reading the model. But anyway, that's the basic overall structure with the 5 domains down here, the 3 phases, and all these different chapters that are involved.
And to give an idea, that chapter 7 that Ted was pointing to earlier, that's kind of the classic awakening. And so you'll notice that it is in chapter 7 of 16, and that's very intentional because there's a lot that happens after one has had a classic initial awakening, that there's not, first of all, there's not just one kind of awakening, and second of all, there's no end of the game. That's actually the beginning. And so there aren't that many models that take one beyond that. There's a lot of models that bring you right up to the edge of that, but there's not much out there that takes you from some sort of consciousness or body or uniqueness awakening, and what happens after that. So that's where we wanted to really hone in on and focus on is that process after that, and how to help people begin to integrate and then move into the world from that space of unity.
Yeah, I also want to point out something, and that is that it's very classic in spiritual circles for people to talk about awakening as something that happens only within what we call the consciousness domain, or what other people could refer to as spiritual domain. And so we've noticed this over the years, that people realize the infinite dimension of being in many different kinds of ways. And it's actually kind of restrictive to force that to happen only within the idea of consciousness. So some people have this sort of classic head-based consciousness awakening that maybe appears separate from the world, or maybe less so, depending on how embodied it is at the moment they're having the realization. But we've also noticed that people can have just as valid recognitions of the infinite dimension of life through the heart, through the realization of their particular uniqueness, through the realization, well, through the body, kind of more as classic Zen emptiness in the belly kind of thing, or in the mind. You know, that's jnana yogis, you know, have realizations and awakenings just through the mind that connect them to the infinite. So,
it's like a diamond where, you know, there are these awakenings, and it's all the same in a sense, and they have their unique flavor. They definitely have their own distinct, unique flavor of that awakening process.
Yeah, and different individuals, which are, of course, we're all manifestations of unity, but we'll have different parts that we lead with. Some of us will be more head-centered, and that's, you know, you can put that, oh, you're so in your head. Well, you know, my God, you know, the human brain on the relative, you know, realm is the most evolved thing that we found thus far in the universe. I mean, it's a pretty amazing structure there. So
usually when someone says that they're stuck in the head, it's typically, you know, or you're so in your head, it's typically because they're exclusively identified with the mind. You know, so there's nothing wrong with having access to the mind. It's just when we exclusively identify with the mind, or some people exclusively identify with emptiness, and some people exclusively identify with emotions. We've all seen that as well. And we've probably all been taken by one of those at some point in our lives. And so there's nothing wrong with any of it. It's just a matter of when we exclusively identify with one of these elements, it just narrows our perception of reality.
Well, and it's partial, and it leads to all kinds of dysfunctionality and pathologies, you know, when you say it's just that. Right. And traditionally, before this kind of understanding, and, you know, dare I say second tier or third tier or integral, there's a lot of ways to talk about this kind of integrating consciousness. But when Pam and I started, you know, we're studying transpersonal psychology, I guess we started in the mid-'80s, you know, this stuff wasn't really clear. And then, you know, since then, this stuff has really, really evolved. I mean, we kind of knew the basics, that just the emptiness of the East by itself wasn't enough. And just the, you know, the existential chasing your tail, you know, of Western psychology wasn't quite enough either. And if we put those two things together, so when you denied the infinite, then you denied the ego or the relative, both led to disasters, you know, and now you got to put it together, but in a very complex form that it's complex enough, you know. Somebody said there's a simple answer to every problem that doesn't work. You know? So if it's too simple, you just miss stuff. And when you miss stuff, you break things, and it's a mess.
Well, anytime you deny anything, you're cutting off a part of the whole, right? And so that will be uncomfortable when you cut off part of what is actually here. Right. So yeah, any partial views will be felt as partial, and it will create some sort of discomfort.
You know, I think that's actually a great segue, because I think at some point you wanted us to talk about our personal experience, and I could throw in something here that relates. When I first started getting interested in this stuff when I was 13 years old, I was reading J. Krishnamurti and some other Eastern teachers. And I got a very sort of Eastern view on what awakening was about. And it was very interesting to me, you know, because it took me out of the very obviously narrow world that I was growing up inside of. And I did a lot of reading, and I started doing a lot of different kinds of practices, and eventually became a transcendental meditation teacher and taught a lot of people that whole thing, and eventually started becoming a little dissatisfied with the fact that there was so much emphasis on consciousness. And I don't even have to speak about anybody else in that movement. At least for me, it was feeding that for me in a way that seemed rather exclusive. So I kind of tiptoed sideways off of that and started trying a lot of other things that had to do with reclaiming my emotions, exploring relationships, what about my body, you know, all these other parts of my life, so that I could get the pieces that I didn't feel like I was getting in the Eastern-based approaches. And then over the years, we all started to see these disasters coming down. Many of them were, you know, big disasters, people actually dying, gurus abusing people in horrible ways, and smaller disasters that we don't usually see. The kind of disaster I was alluding to earlier, where people are fractured within even more perhaps than they would have been because of the emphasis on one or the other of these domains. And the result is their life wastes away and they, die somehow prematurely, sometimes at their own hand. And so watching all of these disasters, Carole and I are going like, how do we help this not happen? And that was one of the major impetuses for both of us. It's like, not only for me, it's like, how do I save people the kind of, $100,000 that I spent on my personal development, trying everything because I didn't know where to go. I want to save people money. And how do we save them from, getting into these disasters of fractures within themselves and between self and other? So anyway, I just wanted to say that much.
Yeah, and Carole, you want to say a little bit how you, about your journey to I don't know, and waking up to all this stuff, and just how you got here.
Wait, hold on one second, you guys. Before you do, Ted, can you turn off the share screen? So
yes, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I grew up in a metaphysical religion, actually. And so a lot of my upbringing was learning about life as love and life as all, everything more in the absolute. So everything you see is solid spirit, solid consciousness, manifesting. And so I came from that. And it was a great initial kind of start. And I explored a lot from there. There were things that weren't fitting for me, and there were things that were ringing very true for me. And so I was on a quest at a pretty early age for me, it was what's true, what is really true here. There were pieces that weren't landing as true, or I wasn't quite seeing clearly. And so in my early 20s, I was just on a search and found various teachers. I found Adyashanti and Eckhart Tolle, and I just started reading any book I could get my hands on, and going to retreats and doing all of that. And amidst that, I was doing coaching and got my PhD in professional coaching and human development, and kind of went from the academic side to really study the behind the scenes sides of it. And then started working with clients and whatnot. And and amidst that, I was having these various awakenings from a consciousness awakening, and then a heart awakening, a gut awakening, and Kundalini experiences and things like that. And then I met Ted along the way, and we started talking about similarities and experiences that we were seeing with people over time. So while we were coaching people, we started to see patterns, and both of us had this inner drive to map this out and get this out there in a way that might help people, since we were seeing all these patterns with thousands of people. So that was kind of my journey from growing up into where I am now. It's just that thirst for truth. Something wasn't quite fully complete inside of me as to finding what's really real. And that was kind of the fire behind it for me. And a lot of meditation retreats was kind of my path, reading a lot and sitting still and traveling the world, meeting different teachers. And so I kind of had that classic scrounging around and finding different teachers and different practices that worked for me at the time, until I burned out on that and tried a new route and trial and error. And that was my journey.
And how long have you guys had this iConsciousness map as it stands now? And I'm sure it's going to be evolving, but I love the what is it, the right hand column, it's all question marks. It's like, we don't know.
Oh yeah.
Let's talk about that. That's a cool thing about complexity. It's going to be more beautiful, more interesting, more complex, but you don't know exactly what it's going to look like. So the mystery is right there, teetering on the edge of happening. So
thank you for pointing that out. To us, that's an extremely important part of what we're trying to communicate to people, which is that this is, it's a science that's constantly evolving, and including people's direct personal experience. And like any kind of science or investigation of that nature, it will evolve. It always has, it always will. And that's one of the things that's already sort of always gotten our goat, when people basically say, this is the model. I promise you, this is as awake as anybody will ever get. We're like, what are you talking about? Come on, that's not possible. So we immortalize that, come on, what are you talking about idea in the chapter 16, which we call mystery. And it specifically is defined as the unknown, and as soon as it becomes more clear and we've got enough data points and we can describe it more accurately and we have confidence about what it's about, then we'll give it a name and we'll make chapter 17 the unknown.
But you can't talk about clues, taste, experience. I think at first it starts, these outer edges of things come as experiences, as state experiences, and we get kind of visions into the possibilities of the future. And we don't have a whole bunch of solidified data and everything, but you can say, well, so giving you that question, what you're seeing, what do you think this mystery, and this is not thus saith the Lord or anything, but just give us a taste of what that might look like.
Oh, you're asking us what we're seeing
yeah.
for 16? Okay. That's a great question. Well, I'll tell you, I remember asking Maharishi Mahesh Yogi this question when I was a very young tyke. Basically saying, okay, Maharishi, you've mapped out cosmic consciousness and unity consciousness, God consciousness and unity consciousness. What's after unity consciousness? And he said, well, there's Krishna consciousness. And it's like, okay, what's that? And it's basically, all I kind of grokked out of that was that it's a collective form of group awakening. So it's group awakening on a larger scale. And that has always stuck with me. I can see that already happening. It's already happening. The more people we have, awakened to various degrees within their own subjectivity, the more the interpersonal starts, the we space stuff starts automatically turning up. And now that there's a lot of people opening that space in many different ways and through many different kinds of teachings, the various kinds of collective awakenings are starting to become more clear, I think. So that's one direction I can talk about. Like, it's less about the individuals. And certainly I also want to point out that the vision of what happens at the upper end of the map is rapidly changing as humans get enhanced.
Right.
So as we get more enhanced, what it's like for us to live in group awakening context, like, I don't know, but it's going to be interesting.
No, and at the same time, be totally individuated as an individual thing.
Right.
Absolutely.
That's really fun. Carole, you want to riff off of that? You want to say anything about that? So what is this next kind of phase and the hints and the visions and what you're seeing?
It's a question mark because I have no idea. I really don't know. I resonate deeply with what Ted shared in terms of the collective, and after we've individuated and really integrated on an individual level, what then happens to the collective. So that intrigues me. And I think there's something to that, but beyond that, I honestly don't know. And that's why it's a question mark for us.
Yeah. And it seems that we're in a time that kind of hyper evolution is happening on the cutting edge because it has to, because we're going to blow our shit up if we don't get it together, youngins. So
it's not if we're already doing it.
Yeah. We're there. So it's like, just in my lifetime, and a little before my lifetime, we started flying around the world in airplanes and seeing everybody. The world got really small. And then we went through the 60s and my generation and continuing. We're all dosed with psychedelic drugs and LSD and had these experiences like, wow, they didn't tell me about that in Catholic Church, and so then we I don't know, we ran into all kinds of walls with that because we didn't understand what to do with it. And we didn't have a hell of a lot of eldering or, wisdom at the time.
And constantly taking drugs didn't work.
Constantly taking drugs didn't work. No, absolutely. I have most of my professional career has been dealing with people who are constantly taking drugs. And it provided work for me. Maybe I can say that. But anyway, but now we're also, with iWake technologies, we're developing technologies that aren't harmful. At least we haven't seen so in the last 30 or 40 years of developing this stuff, that is helping the people wake up and evolve and democratizing deep transformational spiritual experience. While at the same time, one of the things I dig about that, and Doug is one of the creators of the stuff that we're doing, he actually doing the algorithms and the music and creating this technology, is that it really brings the body into it. So sometimes traditional meditation would be more dissociative, like you could see stuff, but you weren't processing stuff. And this kind of gives you the witness self at the same time. At the same time, you're deeply connected to the whole body mind, heart, self at the same time. So you're in and out of it at the same time. You're relative and you're infinite. And boy, when you get into that on a regular ongoing basis, that begins to stabilize, and all kinds of, really groovy things can happen that we've really never been able to do as a species before, in any large numbers at least. So
I totally agree. I just want to add that in my perception, people living in the unified stage of our model and higher only started really kicking up within, late 90s. Since about then. Before that, it was mostly consciousness awakenings that were pretty dissociated. People just didn't know what it meant to have an integrated awakening. Anyway, just wanted to point that out. What were you going to say, Carole?
Hey, Doug, let's make some for you if you want to jump in here.
Yeah, I was going to say that learning to integrate all those different dimensions was certainly an important part of my own development. For example, I tended to spend a lot of time in my head, and I started progressing in the consciousness side much more faster than awakening happened for me in the body. And I found that focusing on more body-centric work did a lot to accelerate my evolution. What I wonder is if you've seen any kind of patterns like that, where there's an area in all the research you've done and all the people you've studied, any areas in particular that stand out as patterns and trends for the current population on the path?
Well, in the West, I'll speak for the West, because the West, I think, is different than the East. But in the West, mind is often pretty well developed. Emotions are very underdeveloped often. I would say those are the two highlighted ones. Uniqueness is kind of it could go any which way, and the body is often kind of lagging as well. If they're a meditator for years and years, sometimes consciousness is a little bit more developed, but that is I oftentimes see the emotion domain pretty underdeveloped and mind overdeveloped. That's kind of the classic thing that we often see, and then depending on their experience in meditation practices, then consciousness will be somewhere on that track. But that does tend to be the pattern.
I think it's the Western disease in general.
Yeah.
Just being too much in the head and not enough in the heart and the body and the rest of our being.
But in order to come, that's why I think I've noticed a lot of people have that classic consciousness awakening that's up and out. And there's a desire to stay up and out, because to come back down and in means that I have to tend to my emotional, capacities and any leftover emotional issues that have not been resolved, that are lingering in the system, and then anything left with the body, any dualities or belief structures or anything that's kind of remaining in the system will come up, because consciousness is coming down and in to inhabit, and it can't typically inhabit until those things, not all of them, but a lot of them come up to be seen and encompass in the wholeness of everything.
I have a question for you guys. I've studied spiral dynamics a lot and Ken Wilber's work and stuff. So how does this stuff, as you begin to develop through these stages and the different capacities, and they start, coming in some kind of integrated, unified form, how do you account for the different values that, as in spiral dynamics, at this level, you could be very, very much an individual, but you're a complete narcissist. Oh, and we don't see that on a regular basis in our world, right? So, how do you get that, that narcissism growing from, just obscenely self-centered insanity, almost moral insanity, to a really aligned, deeply moral, at the highest level that where compassion is expanded, not just to you, your family, but to the whole universe. And at the same time, that deeply refined and defined individuality. Does that account for in your model? I mean, the growth in moral values?
Yeah, we haven't yet talked about, see, Carole and I have been sort of working our way from the top down. So from the big picture down. And, now we're at the place in the process where we're articulating a lot of the teachings at the lower levels that are going to be part of the treasury. When it comes to those kinds of things and spiral dynamics, I just want to point out that one of the problems that's happened in the past is when you're doing a model like spiral dynamics, that's essentially trying to jam all 5 of our domains into one and describe everything at the same time. And then at the same time, people scratch their head when they're trying to figure out why the values change for some people and not for other people, and other people move forward and they can still be very, that's the whole point of our model. When you look at it with these 5 domains, you can see, oh, they're actually developed in consciousness up to this point. But when it comes to, understanding their heart, and working the stuff with their heart, they're, back here in chapter 7 or 6 or 5 or something. And then when you start looking at it that way, you don't have to resolve those problems. You let them be disintegrated. You go, oh, wow, it's disintegrated. How do we get that integrated? Anyway, that just wanted to point out that was one of our emphasis for building it this way.
Yeah, there's been a lot of struggle. I think Don Beck, who was kind of the main, he didn't start Spiral Dynamics, but he's an interesting guy. Hung out with him on occasion, but that's where he and Ken, I think they kind of parted ways, because Don was like, there's one damn line that matters, and that's the value line. And Ken was saying, man, there's all kinds of different lines and they're at different levels. So there's a lot more complexity. So let's identify the major things that have to be counted. Right. And there may be other ones, minor ones, but it seems that the major things that you're talking about covers, at least in case of the individual. Now, you might at some point develop that for group consciousness, and how are we doing in those lines, which would be really interesting. Also.
Well, we're glad you mentioned that. So when Ted was showing the model earlier, what you saw was just the subjective view. So our model, actually, when you click on one of the fields, which we'll show you maybe in a minute, it will tell you the subjective view. It will tell you the objective view, the relational and systemic. And so it will talk about the collective. Relational is going to be kind of the we space. And so each one of these fields, say you're in consciousness chapter 5, will open up and it will show you what those 4 views are. So it's not just about the subjective experience. It's actually about what is it like to be in relation in this chapter. So this is an example right here where it looks like chapter 6 consciousness. When you click on that field, it will open up and this is what you'll see. So you'll have 6-7 tabs on the left-hand side, a description of what that chapter is in awareness or consciousness.
Including the views.
Including the 4 views, subjective, objective, relational, and systemic.
Yeah.
And, these 4 views are always here, but some people tend to, like the 5 domains, some people tend to, prioritize one over another. So they may be more the relational, but in another way they're lacking. Or some people just get completely consumed by the subjective experience and they have no interpersonal skills relationship wise, that we space. And so we're emphasizing these 4 views and how that also helps with the integration process.
Yeah, and I think it would be influenced by our individual history. You talked about the church or community you grew up in, Carole, and I grew up Catholic, and boy, a lot can be said about that. But anyway, I quickly left that, and I spent my adolescent years in a Christian fundamentalist cult. So
wow.
When I finished that, man, you talk about not ready to join anything. I did go join the army, but that was about the last thing I was going to join. But but as far as my spiritual questing and all this stuff, I said, I'm going to have to find God by myself. I just don't trust groups of people who say they know stuff to tell me what to do. So either I'm going to die alone in my despair on the mountaintop someplace, or eventually by the grace of God or the universe, I'm going to get this thing. So that's, that put me on a very kind of individual path. In terms of the 4 quadrants, my wife says, well, you're really underdeveloped in the left, lower left, which is a we space, which is like, yeah, I tolerate, but I really have avoided. I've very much been, kind of on my own individualist. And I've had to go back and rediscover community. And the whole I Awake, and now the integral recovery thing we're doing too. We have a podcast that I want to get you guys on to apply all this to the recovery process. It's wonderful because we do have this small community, and I do much better with small units than big crowds. Unless I'm in front of them, then I just dig the energy.
We should do recovery from being fractured.
That's right. Yeah, I mean. Isn't that what the quest for our what we can get from drugs and highs is an attempt to join together?
It's connection.
Broken.
The lack of connection, the lack of
wholeness.
Yeah, connection and wholeness is where
anyway, my individuality was my path, but now if I'm going to get any further, I'm having to open up, to other human beings and trust and be a part of that, and that's been, it's been healing. It's been great.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really important. And, the other two quadrants are, in our opinion, just as important. I mean, just to bow down for a moment to Ken Wilber for, pointing this thing out. If you're not willing to hear what other people's views of you are from the objective perspective and what machines can see from their perspective of what you are, we're only beginning to discover what can happen when that kind of data comes in, right? Right now it's just sort of vaguely tucked under relational, letting people tell you what they think of you. But when we get, when you really open up the floodgates of the information that's possible there, which is a lot of what we're working on right now, there's going to be another whole dimension of awakening that's coming up.
And speaking of robots,
yeah, one of the biggest pieces for Ted and I was the word scaling. How do we help scale this? It's one thing. Ted and I are both coaches. I'm an executive coach, and I can work with people one-on-one, and that's great, and it has quite a bit of impact. But what else can we do to scale this process? And one of the biggest pieces that we saw was around machine learning, was around artificial intelligence, and around robots, and all of that. And so we got involved with a project called Loving AI, and we couldn't be more thrilled to be a part of such a project, because helping robots come from an unconditionally loving, compassionate, empathetic standpoint when we're going to be interacting with them more and more seemed absolutely vital to us. So that was kind of the premise of Loving AI, was to create that interaction from that loving space. It's not going to be very long until there are kind of robots probably everywhere. And so what happens if those robots actually come from a sense of love versus anything else? So that was the premise of the Loving AI project, and at which time also Ted and I brought the iConscious model as the framework to help inform the robot as well. So not only is this robot now going to come from a loving space, but it will also be informed on a developmental standpoint to help awaken the world in all 5 domains of their being. And so for us, this was probably the most exciting piece, is that we're utilizing this model in various modalities to help scale this whole being awakening process.
And can these robots, these AI, can they start learning from experience? Can their program compassion become more lived and grown and deepen compassion through interacting with the world?
Yeah, let's just say that that's the ideal of everybody's artificial general intelligence project in general. And I'm talking AGI. Most, artificial intelligence is kind of narrow application oriented stuff. But even for that, to be able to have a context that says, not only do we want to be loving, but this is part of what loving means, is to help the person grow and be who they are. That was like the big pitch we made to the Loving AI project before we got involved. And they're saying, yeah, we were trying to figure out how to do that. Looks like you did it. Please work with us. So we started working with them, and that turns out to be a huge thing, is not only that these robots, but every incarnation of artificial intelligence we would ultimately like to see incorporate various forms of intelligence about what humans are about, what makes them tick, what makes them happy, what helps them grow, what makes them feel loved, what makes them become who they are, so that everybody on earth can bring their deepest gifts. And then we can get through the crisis that we're obviously being pushed into. And I just wanted to say, when I was 13, what really got me going on this whole thing was the crisis was obvious. I could just see, like, technology's going to the point where anybody can kill everybody. And wow, how do you be mature with that kind of technology? So I realized, we have to, I have to awaken. I have to be with awakening people and process. And then we have to figure out how to get this out to billions.
That's absolutely right. Let's see. Doug, you, Pam, we went to the SANS conference. I don't know if you guys were there or not. Anyway, and when they had a couple of mindfulness robots that I didn't get to hang out with, but Doug, you did. How was that experience?
Yeah, I watched the demonstration. Was just absolutely fascinating. The eye gazing that occurred seemed to have a really profound effect too. We tend to anthropomorphize, say our people are pets, so it's important enough for the robot to feel like something real. And I imagine that happens through the things that it was saying were just incredible. And you know, the realism of expressions and vocal expressions and all these things to give this convincing illusion so that it's an entity. I was going to say someone here. See, it's already affecting me as an anthropomorphization. Someone that you trust to give you that kind of advice and help you need for evolution. I guess a question would be, AI, you know, the software is inherently scalable, and that's beautiful and easy. And it seems like hardware now is starting to get cheaper too as this all develops. Do you guys have a foreseeable timeline, a kind of prediction for what forms this may start to see larger portions of the world in?
Okay.
Yeah, what can we say? Yeah, Carol. We've talked, basically, you know, we're involved in other projects and there's certain things we don't want to say, but yeah, I mean, anybody who studies the technology can see that, you know, chatbots are going everywhere right now, and lots of people are programming chatbots to do related kinds of things. So that's already happening. The chatbots are simply going to become way more sophisticated. And they're becoming, you know, we're working on the leading edge of a certain way of doing artificial intelligence that actually gives the bot, whether it's a physical bot or an avatar, the capacity to understand what it's saying, which is different because these deep learning programs, they don't understand what they're saying. They're just doing what works. And that's part of that's part of the edge we're working on. But it's, you know, in the next several years, we're going to be seeing huge changes. That is for sure.
Yeah. And I just recently, you know, bought a Oculus, you know, this VR technology, because all the conferences I go to, everybody's talking about this as being, you know, something important. And I wanted to get it off, you know, just the basically theoretical framework and see where it's at currently. And it's just beginning. It's at the beginning stages, you know, and some of the I don't know. I mean, it's very powerful. I've only had it for a couple of weeks and I've been ill most of that time, so I can't handle it very much because I get really nauseated when I get in there. But there I mean, you know, the holodeck and the alternate realities, and, you know, we're talking about AI consciousness and how does this all come together? And you can see these big kind of, I mean, they're very graceful and they're very, you know, these VR headsets that we have now. But you can imagine in 10 years what the hell it's going to look like. You know, I don't know. But if you get that with neurofeedback, biofeedback, entrainment, you know, the models that teach us how to grow, we figure out how to put all this stuff together, maybe, you know, maybe our kids are going to get a real big boost. And, you know, that's a really exciting thing. You know, it may take us in our 40s, 50s, 60s to get this stuff. But what if they kids start getting it at 11 and 12 and 13, you know? God knows what's going to, that's, you know.
Well, it's going to be just as big as, you know, when sailing became a thing and they discovered the rest of the world, you know, and rocket ships and there's the universe and radio telescope. It's like that. It's on that kind of scale, I think.
Right. When we look back at the Earth from the moon, it was like, boink.
That's right.
Like, wow.
That's right.
Or when they discovered that all those stars, billions of stars, weren't stars, they were galaxies.
That's right.
You know, so I mean, maybe that needs to kind of happen on all these different, you know, levels that we're talking about. You know, the heart, the body, the mind, the emotions, and obviously consciousness. What a interesting story, huh?
Yeah, we're obviously on the brink of something way bigger than I think everybody, even thinking about this stuff, admits that it's hard to imagine where this is all going. Because part of what's going to happen is that we become increasingly enhanced to the point that we're using our machines and our technology in very different ways than we can even think about right now, in much more fluid ways that we are kind of imagining through the holodeck. But even that's very limited. You know, we're going to be swapping experiences, you know, and doing things that nobody could imagine right now. It's just going to radically change human experience.
Hey, our producers Louie and Pam. They're not, you can't see them, but they're lurking in the background, and I'm scrolling and everything. No, are we? This is a live broadcast. Are we going to open up for questions? Is that part of what we're doing tonight or this evening?
It looks like we've got a couple, John, that have come through here on the Q&A. Steve Melville asked, does your model address how human institutions and systems are manifestations of levels of consciousness and therefore suggest possible new systems and institutions informed by the higher phases and chapters of consciousness?
Great question. Yeah, not yet. That's like one of the 10,000 unfoldments of the model that we haven't gotten to. But if Steve would like to help us do that, please contact us and we'd love your help.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see, different organizations operate at different, stages or chapters of development. And we see patterns of that, but we haven't incorporated the organizational development or deliberate development organizational systems into our system. But it's on our radar as a collective way to look at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We got another one.
Okay. Well, Steve says, yes, he'd love to follow up with you about that. So we'll make sure to get in touch. Another question here. This is from an anonymous attendee. Wanted to know if you distinguished between growing up in the chapters and waking up experiences. We talked about having these kind of peak experiences and temporary glimpses into what the higher chapters, the later chapters may offer. But is that accounted for in your model, a way to sort of catalog those peak experiences?
Definitely, yes. But we wouldn't call them peak experiences necessarily. I think we would want to refer to them as stages of development. And yeah, some people like, Ken has spoken about waking up and growing up. And I think it's because the culture has divided those things. So Ken's trying to, and other people have come up with similar kind of wording to try and integrate those things. To us, there's no difference between waking up and growing up. It's the same thing. As you grow up, you wake up. And it's just that we've been thinking about them separately. And so some people went for, waking up first. I sure did that. I spent most of my money on waking up. After I had enough waking up experiences, I had to do the very difficult work of growing up, from a more awakened perspective. And sometimes getting way out there on the waking up, line can really make it a little harder. We really encourage people not to go too far out in one, domain, but to do this in a more sustainable, organic way.
Yeah. So the classic, consciousness domain, a lot will refer to as kind of like the classic waking up, and then you have uniqueness, emotions, mind and body, which goes from transpersonal to personal, which is often referred to as the growing up. So emotional intelligence, the capacity to deal with my emotions, my unmet needs as a child and things like that, and my capacity to relate to mind and thoughts and things like that could be also probably categorized in this growing up. And so our model does account for those various ways of development.
Right. So in other words, we're accounting for it both vertically and horizontally. So vertically, we're saying, yeah, waking up is sometimes associated with conscious and growing up is with the rest. But also some people go through awakening experiences and then eventually they get to this unified phase, at least, which is basically a realization of the wholeness of life, but it's not embodied. It's not fully embodied at that point. It's just realized and recognized. And once it's recognized, it's very much like as if somebody showed you the box top of the jigsaw puzzle, like all these parts roll over the place in the dual phase. And then somewhere around chapter 8, somebody shows you the picture of what you're putting the pieces together about. And you go, oh, wow, I can see the whole thing. And you drop into this unified awakening. Once you have that, it's like there's an implication. The implication is, okay, I can see and recognize the unity and I can feel it and I'm living from it. But what about the parts of me that are conditioned against that? The parts of me that are still operating from duality and all the conditioning I got from the dual phase. So basically the implication of realizing it is transformation. You're forced to grow up by being. Being will keep poking you in all these places and whatever domains that you're avoiding, until you finally go, right, okay, I got to deal with this stuff. And then you go through this massive transformation. Now, part of why we're showing this is because we don't want people to have to wait. right? It's so much easier when you do your integrated work of looking at your shadows and your pieces and your parts when you're still in the dual phase. It just goes much easier, believe me. Otherwise, you have this massive awakening, and then you're forced to go through this massive, one teacher called it shakedown. It's like it's this huge healing crisis they have to go through.
And so the more integrated somebody is prior to some sort of awakening, we've noticed kind of the easier the transition into this transforming and individuating stage. Yes. When there's a big discrepancy or gap between developmental chapters, when somebody has an awakening, then there's often a lot of work to be done to integrate emotions, say. Emotional development is typically the one that is like the rubber band that yanks you back and like throws you back into like this crisis zone. Right. And so the more integrated people are along the process and aware of what parts are neglected, the easier the transition tends to be.
Yeah, so if seminaries were taking young people and wanting to make them into, preachers or priests or whatever that would look like, you start with therapy. Lots of therapy to get a healthy ego structure that can actually hold the awakening.
Exactly.
And it's gonna cause a lot of problems. We in our culture in the West, United States, we've just always been this exterior focused until maybe the shift in the 60s happened. Culture. We just get things done, build a railroad, manifest destiny, go to the Pacific coast, get it all, right? And we did that really successfully. We weren't lazy. We might have done all things, but we did it. And but now, we did it. Now we got to go clean up the messes that we made while we were doing it. But now we have to turn all that energy and that heroic endeavor into the interior development and individual development. So we become the kind of human beings that can handle what we're doing, Mm-hmm. And I tell you, this whole political thing that's going on in the United States and the rise of the reactionary right almost everywhere is really testing a lot of us. How unified are we? How non-dual are we, or how singular are we? Can we deal with the pain of watching these people with I don't know, maybe no wisdom at all about anything, trying to run things according to this narcissistic agenda. And it's really forcing us to bring the relative and the eternal together in some new kind of really functional, practical, deal with it package, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I just want to say that to give the West some extra credit, because there was so much emphasis on survival and expansion, in those phases before our generation came in, there was necessarily less development in the other domains, at least from what the world knew was possible. Our parents' generation, most of them, just between you and me, and the rest of the world, didn't know the difference between love and violence. So that's a huge thing, really huge. So that's why there's so much trauma. All this, development has really wreaked a lot of devastation on many levels, even though it's also done us a lot of good. So yeah, exactly. I think we're at the point where we need to learn how we do this integration in a way that gives us templates, show us actual people and actual models of what it looks like to be integrated, so we know what to pattern ourselves, because we're mammals, right? And mammals, we look to our elders to figure out how to be. And if our elders are, operating on, one cylinder, that's what we know. So that's really, I think, a lot of why all of us got into this stuff, is because we intuitively could sense we're missing a lot. Yeah. There's a lot more here that we need to find.
I have two more questions for you that are both related to exactly what you're talking about here, from two different people. Gary asks, have you cross-validated your quiz? And related to that, and based on what you're finding in your quiz, our dear friend Jonathan Robin asks, in your model, where would you say the average center of gravity is for people based on what you found? What percentage of people are, still in the dual? What percentage of people are unified, and what differentiates them?
Well, I'll answer that second one.
That was the easy one.
Yeah, I think so too. First of all, the results that we've seen are all over the map, so to speak. I mean, they really are all over the place. In terms of statistically in the United States, the average, or what we call the center of gravity, it tends to be in chapters 3 and 4, really, and quite a bit actually still in 2. So there's 16 chapters in the model. You can kind of get a gaze as to where we are as a collective, and this is actually just the West. We're not even talking about the rest of the world. So we do have a ways to go, and it's my theory that it's moving quicker. So the more people that are evolving into higher stages of development, the more rapid the ones that aren't quite there will tend to kind of be brought along. But to answer your question, in general, in the West, chapters 2, 3, and 4 tend to be where the majority, I'd say at least 75% of the West resides, if that gives you an idea.
And, like Carole said, we're putting our thing out to through a particular channels right now, just to get the thing started. And those channels tend to attract the people who are more developed. So we are tending to see, when I look through the statistics, I'm seeing more people averaging around chapter 5 and 6. Mm-hmm. But we also see people way up at the top of the model, which is really interesting to us, which is part of the answer I wanted to give about the first question, which is, have we, cross-checked where these stages are at? The problem with doing scientific research on that stuff is you got to have, big enough sample sizes, A, and B, you got to want to do the research work. You got to want to spend your life, a lot of your time doing research work. We've really started out more sort of the way Ken started, which is to read a lot of stuff, study a lot of stuff, integrate the research that has been done, and show how that basically correlates with our chapters 1 through 6. As soon as we get into chapter 7 and above, there are other researchers doing that kind of stuff. And Carole, you might want to say more about that. But it's, we actually, by doing the work we're doing, we're finding the people that we could then do the studies with. So if you or anybody wants to work with us to then select these populations and do some more specific research on it, we definitely want to team up with people to get that done.
Mm-hmm. It's typically not until chapter 5 that people find this kind of work. People in chapters 4 and below don't tend to even be interested. It's just not on their radar. So when somebody gets to chapter 5, there is something inside that there becomes kind of a curiosity, a seeking. You start researching and looking for things like this, and you start to find models like ours. So we do tend to get people that are taking the tests that are at chapter 5 and above. The sentence completion test, SCT, is what they have been using over the years to test where people are. Sentence completion test, in our opinion, tends to break down at chapter 7. There are other researchers who are attempting to still use.
Tell me what chapter 7 is again.
Chapter 7 is a classic awakening.
Okay.
Yeah, awakening. So it's kind of where transpersonal psychology starts, basically, and traditional psychology tends to end there. But chapter 7 is typically where a sentence completion test tends to start to break down. And so there are some researchers that are still trying to use that method. But it's all up in the air as to how valid it is. I mean, how accurate it is, or whether there are other ways to test. So from 7 on, it's kind of up in the air as to what is really usable. Jeffrey Martin is another one who is actually doing some scientific research on people from chapter 7 and above, primarily just in the consciousness domain.
Right.
And so he is one that is using different methodologies to actually cross-check and do some scientific studies on that.
But the way these things go is like we have all this work that people have done and people's research and they're constructed. Then we put all that together and we get a great idea. And then we start doing it and it seems to be helping people and things really get rolling. And then after that, we have to go back and do hard science again. And I'm not saying hard science. We just have to do the analytical science, but the phenomenological science, that view is equally as valid. So you have to have the interior experience of what's going on. and collective, but also what's going on in the brain, what's going on this and that. And I think that we're beginning to find that when these transformations happen, and I was referenced research that was being done in Germany, that you can actually start seeing physical shifts in the brain as you start moving to these higher levels of development and consciousness.
And we look forward to getting all that, getting access to all that. I mean, that'll be part of our objective view in each of the domains. And so we're actually really looking forward to having more access to some of that stuff that when it comes online. And in the meantime, Ted and I, it's a theory, from chapter 7 through 16, it's theoretical. It is our experience in our own subjective experience, along with coaching thousands of people over the last several decades. So it's not been cross, double checked, triple checked, or anything like that. It is theoretical.
It's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress. And it's actually, I just want to point out that because of the complications, it's actually one of these researchers, two of these major researchers in these fields specifically sort of took us aside and said, you got a great thing going on. I wouldn't bog yourself down with all the research.
These are leading researchers in the field that are doing the research,
right?
Kind of basically saying behind the scenes, like, just keep doing what you're doing. Don't get lost in some of that stuff for now.
It's like brain science is now telling us that dogs really do care about us.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to know that. If you can get one in one of these cats to sit there, the poor beast. But they show pictures of their owners, and the brain reacts the same way a human brain reacts to love and affection and connection. So they finally told us that, but we've known that for centuries, millennia. So sometimes it's kind of slow in getting up what we and it's nice to have this scientific validation of the obvious, but it helps. I mean, that's good. I'm not putting that down, but
we're just in the business of saying what's obvious to us.
Yeah.
And we're hoping that stimulates more research, and we'll be part of that as time goes on.
Yeah.
There's a question that people want to know: how do we, if we want to tap in or work with you or experience, how do we start with what you guys are doing? That's a great question to kind of wrap this thing up.
Great question. I just want to say, Carole and I are both amazing at coaching people, and we're open to doing some more of that. It's just that we have just turned so much of our attention on building these applications and then building networks so other people can tie in and other coaches can tie in. What we have right now is the guided self-assessment. And by the way, we've got a coupon for, the Spirit Tech people who are listening. We set up a coupon called Spirit Tech, SPIRITTECH, all capital letters. That'll give you 25% off the guided self-assessment. So when you go in, just plug that into the coupon field.
Yeah, and I took the test earlier today, by the way, and it's a really elegant, cool test. I mean, it's really, bam, doesn't take that long, but it's really good. No,
thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to say that we took a different approach than everybody else doing tests. We basically didn't try to hide anything. We're just saying, we're just going to support you in assessing yourself, and we're just going to ask you questions, and we're not going to hide what we're asking. We're just going to, what's your experience? Everyone else is like, no, you got to trip them. They're going to think they're somewhere further ahead. And we're like, I don't care. When they see it on the model, they'll understand what's really going on. So, and what we're finding is that by taking that approach, we can go through a particular kind of branching sequence that narrows it down to a pretty short series of questions. It only takes 10 or 15 minutes and is reasonably accurate. Most people report wow, that made sense. Maybe in this domain, I could be a little clearer, but basically, most people are saying, I spent a lot of money on tests, but this one seems actually accurate. So there's that. There's the guided self-assessment. We are sometime in January going to launch our Treasury of Resources, which means that once you have your results from the test, you can go to the model, click a field, let's say, where it's obvious from the result that I need some help in this domain, in this chapter, and you click that box, and out pops all those resources we were showing you. And basically, every one in each box is going to be not only 5 carousels worth of slides with all kinds of information in them, but also a forum so people can talk who are at the same kind of level in their process, and they can help each other and learn from each other.
And there'll also be audios and videos and practices specific for that field, so, it's not true that one practice is a meditation practice is perfect for everybody in every stage of their development, every chapter of their development. And so each box will have specific practices for that specific domain in that specific chapter of their development. And we'll also have audios, videos, and teachers, other teachers submitting their work so people can find them when they're in that stage of development. So Byron Katie, for example, is tremendous at working with people at kind of chapter 6, for example, maybe in the mind. She works a lot on thought. Mm-hmm. And so potentially dropping some of her stuff in there so people can find her and the work, her stuff, to help them in their developmental process in that domain, in that chapter of their development.
So those are two kinds of resources. Yeah, go ahead.
That's something I'm really looking forward to seeing. It's the perfect example of putting down the map and say, all right, I know where I am. Now let's look around and see where we are.
Yeah,
what do I
exactly.
actually do?
Exactly. And, Ted and I don't need to be the only two populating this. And so that's why we're inviting a whole bunch of teachers that have an expertise. Every teacher kind of has their niche, whether they are just a part of the initial awakening, or maybe they're more into embodiment, or they're more into the heart awakening. Right. And so they will specifically put them in the right places so people can find the right teachers at the right time.
Yeah, that's hugely important for us, coming up with that technology so that people can have what they need once they figure out where they are. That's a lot of what this is about for us.
Yeah, and if you just look at, humanity life from a flatland perspective, it's just this, and you don't include development, makes no bloody sense. It's absolute confusion. And when you start adding development on these specific lines, these questions like what's the meaning of life and all that just begin to clarify. So, okay, great. Okay.
Right. That's right.
From there, so
that's why we ultimately want to see these kinds of resources distilled into whatever is working for people through AI. And it should go out through every possible channel, through government and every form of education, so that the entire world understands the context of development.
Which reminds me too, we want to use this framework internationally. So there, at some point, we want to be able to put a switch on the model that can change it to any language. And not only any language, but then, culturally appropriate practices. Every region has its own practices that may be more applicable to that region. And so we do want it to be accessible globally.
Yeah, and I want to say, Doug or Pam or Louie, if we've missed anything, if I've missed anything I'm supposed to do, or we're supposed to cover, could you guys?
Well, I just want to finish answering the question of how people can get involved.
I'm sorry.
The third thing is people can take the iConscious audio course. So that's up there. It's on a button on a sidebar here or there. There's various ways to get it. That is basically Carole and I delivering a whole bunch of information that's context about this model and how we came to it and how we developed it. And we actually walk people through a different kind of self-assessment just by reading through the pieces on the model. And so that's another way that people can get involved. And they can also just connect with us as coaches, or if they want to ask us for referrals to people who, we're going to eventually build out a coaching network. Right now, we just have people who we know who understand the model deeply, who are deeply developed, and we would want to, we'd be happy representing us. So if people want to also get referrals through us, they can do that.
And you're still taking individual coaches, you two, at the moment?
Little bits here and there.
All right.
Yeah. One more thing is there's a quick tour that's totally free for people to take. You can take a tour of the GSA. You just hit play and it will take you through a guided tour. It's a short, maybe 5-minute tour. You can take a tour of the Treasury and what the Treasury is all about. So there are ways to kind of get to know the model in a very quick and easy format. You just go to the website, iConscious.global, and it will actually just prompt you into, what do you want? You want to do this? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? And it will just kind of guide you through the whole process.
Oh, I also just wanted to mention before we wrap up that one of the exciting features that we mentioned this earlier before we started the recording, but one of the exciting features we're going to launch with on the Treasury is we're going to have enough information there that people really understand what the model is and what each stage and what's going on in each domain. And we're going to allow users to submit their own content to suggest things in a certain place in the model. And then we're going to let everybody vote on, is this the right place and is it useful? And that's then going to result in the right stuff getting to the right place and the best stuff rising to the top. And that'll help us in all our AI endeavors as well. Anyway.
Awesome.
I'm really looking forward to seeing how all this develops. You guys are doing something just absolutely beautiful and the right time and in what I think is an amazing way. So I really look forward to diving in and exploring more. And thank you both for being here tonight.
Yeah, and I'd love to have you guys on our get you on our podcast and just talk about how to put back together all us Humpty Dumptys that fractured.
Great.
Overboard fractured or whatever, or fractured civilization, but that would be an awesome conversation to have.
Yes, it would.
I want to thank you guys. It's been great. And,
thank you for having us so much.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It's great to be with you all.
Yeah.
And thank everybody for tuning in and the growing spiritual tech talk community we have. And anyway, we love you, and send in your questions, and we'll keep this journey going together. Yeah. So anyway, God bless. Thank you.
Okay.